Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Barden here. It's been a little while since I've come at you from my normal kind of home desk situation. If you've watched a lot of these videos, you may notice it looks a little bit different than normal. Still, basically everything's hooked up and going. I've been having some technical difficulties here, and it's all, been rewired and rehooked up, and all that's left is to just restore the computer back to what it was, and everything should be back to normal. It's just, taking a lot of time to do that. But with the semester coming to an end, that should be, happening before too long. So stay tuned and you'll see that change. Hopping back into it, I've got a video that you're watching right this second that's going to be going on about how to work with input devices utilizing the p5play library, but specifically the new one, version 3.0. Right here, I've got this website. I'll put a link to this page down in the description after we're done recording all this, and you can go check all of it out yourself. This is very useful. To get to this, if you just go to p5play.org, click on the tab that says, not that one, the one that says Learn, and then if you head over to Input, that's where we will be. This video is going to assume you already know how to, create sprites and work with them in, some of the more basic regards. So if you haven't seen that, check out some of the other videos that came out before this. They'll all be in the same playlist, which you can just find, again, linked right down below. With that being said, that should be just about all of it. I'm also going to put a link to the sketch that we make down below, so if you wanted to look at that, go ahead. But if you're going to follow along with me without getting this starting sketch, I'm just going to mention that you will need to include the p5play and plank libraries here. They're needed in order to work. So I'll put this on the screen because YouTube doesn't like me putting HTML code into comments for security reasons. So you can check that out there, or check out the videos I've posted on this also in that same aforementioned playlist. And with that being said, let's hop into it. Again, if you need to look at this in more detail, just hit the pause button for a second. All right, heading back into the main sketch. This one right here, if you load it up, it's just got a sprite thrown right in the middle. It's a different color every time. I'm not going to work with that to make it the same color. We can just use this. With the inputs, we don't have to add anything extra other than what we've already added in the HTML portion. It's already been done for us in the p5play library, which is very handy. I'm going to start with the keyboard, and then we will move along from there. So looking at the keyboard right here, this is generally speaking what we have on the screen. I'll just move my face out of the way for a moment so you can see all of that, all 6 or so of the main interactions that we have here. So again, we've got presses, pressing, holds, holding, released, and held. And these function very, very similarly to things that we'll be seeing with the mouse and the sprite interactions specifically. So there was a little section that, again, I've already recorded it, so you'll see it in a video coming out soon. But we'll go out about how sprites interact with other sprites. And this has the same idea, wherein there's a method that's just keeping track of has blank happened. And when it's happened, it will return a 1, otherwise it returns a 0. So if the keyboard, if you press whatever we sell it to here is a string, this one being just the space bar, it will do a thing. And if we are pressing, it'll do that. So if we're currently pressing a button versus having just pressed it, that's when that triggers a different reaction. One thing that's a little bit different now is we have holds and holding. So again, this will determine whether or not you're holding the mouse for or the keyboard button for at least 12 frames, and then for as long as you're doing that, it'll count up the frames doing that. And then we have when you've released it and when you are no longer holding the mouse. You can find more information about all of this. I'm just going to open it up in a new tab here. From the main p5play webpage, if you go to Docs, And then input device, here's, this is just a link to that same page before, but here's all the main things we can set right here. So there's not a whole lot, but we can work with it there. So again, the threshold for when the computer says, hey, you're holding a thing, the default is, 12 frames. The keyboard is, well, KB, I should say, is the keyboard. And, we can set up different reactions to those different inputs. And then the mouse is the mouse. We'll look at it a bit more in detail in this section right here. All right, I'm going to head back to the code, and I'm going to bring my face back. Okay, so let's make some keyboard interactions in order to move the sprite. There's a bunch of different ways to utilize this. It's again, there's no one right or wrong way. I'm going to use the same kind of methods that are used in the p5play learning pages just for the sake of continuity. But I mean, depending on how you like it, you may want to do a switch to do this. You may have functions that set it all up. The whole core of it is just, hey, we have a sprite, we want to do something when a button is pressed. So I'm just going to say if in my draw function, and we'll just say KB for keyboard dot presses, and that's a method, so we need that there, and as the argument we'll tell it what to do. I'm gonna start simply with the space bar just like before, and then we'll just say let's do it like this: my sprite dot rotation speed plus plus. We'll just make it spin faster every time we click the space bar. And I've gotten that, we're getting some of the fun aliasing effects and all that bit. So again, every time I have now hit the space bar, we are setting up a property to be changed. That's cool. We can do a lot of stuff with that. If you had a function that makes the sprite jump, or other things that happen, maybe it uses a special attack. If you're in some kind of adventure or fighting game, you can map these to very specific keyboard inputs that will just make your life a lot easier. You, generally speaking, don't need to worry about remembering key codes and things like that. You can just say, use, this button is a string, and that's really handy. This library is doing a lot of that background work for you. So I'm going to refresh that to keep it from spinning. And let's look at moving the sprite, because there's some very handy things. If you're in my course that I use this for, we're going to be generally making some 2D games using this library. And that's generally what it's implied for. You don't have to. It can be very useful to have a sprite for other things. But for games, there's some handy information. So I'm going to hop over to, let's see, yes, right here, the keyboard. So normally, as you can see on the screen, if you wanted to read that, you can pause this. You can move your sprites or your characters using the W, A, S, and D keys. Those are probably the most common ones in modern games. You can also, this will also mimic with the arrow keys, and then we have ways we can use with some player 2 stuff. But we can just say up, down, left, and right to respond to the W, A, S, and D and arrow keys, which is extremely handy. So I'm going to add that in. We're going to just comment out this, and I'm going to move this sprite around on the canvas. So if I say if, and I'm just going to copy keyboard.presses. Actually, let's make it keyboard. No, I'll leave it at presses. But instead of there, we can say up, and then I'll just say else if forgot my parentheses there. Else if keyboard.presses. I'll just go around clockwise, right? Else if keyboard.presses down, And last but not least, else if keyboard.presses left. Then we can move our sprite around. We just have to tell our sprite how to move whenever we have clicked this button. So we'll just say my sprite dot, let's say move. Now we'll do it this way. We'll say velocity dot x equals 0. My sprite dot velocity vel they'll both work dot y equals -3, because we want it to move up on the canvas, and as a sprite moves up, its y parameter is decreasing. To move to the right, we'll have to increase x, set y to 0 because it's straight to the right. Down would be a positive value that can stay there, and that pasted in the wrong spot. There we go. And then we'll make this -3 and u 0. Let's just tidy that up so that way it's nice and clean on the screen, and then refresh the code. So now I've clicked into my canvas to utilize it. As I use the W, A, S, and D keys, the sprite is moving around the canvas. I'm going to refresh this because we don't have a way to stop it. And if I click into here again and use the arrow keys on the other side of my keyboard, it's still moving around. Very handy. Refresh. If you wanted to make it so that way it only moves when you press a key, we could do something like if key is pressed and put all of this inside of there. And that should... Oh, it was because we're using the velocity, it's not going. So we could say, boop, boop, boop. We do all that, else my sprite... Actually, we can just copy and paste this. And set them both to 0. So now, to break this down, again, if we're pressing the key, then we're going to see if, if it's a certain key, we move it in a certain way. If it's not any of those four, the sprite's not going to change direction, but it may still move. Like if I pressed W and then down and then H, it's still moving. But as soon as I let go, because the key is no longer pressed, we're not doing A anymore, we're doing B down here. We're stopping the sprite from moving by manually setting its vertical and horizontal velocities to 0. Now, there are other methods that can change how we move a sprite around. I like, for a lot of stuff, setting up the various angular components. Okay, we're moving it this fast vertically and this fast horizontally, and you can really, mathematically set up exactly what you need to do. That's not always the best case. Sometimes you may want it to follow another sprite. There's methods for that. Sometimes you may want it to behave in other ways. Again, there's tons of methods for different ways to move stuff. I'll just briefly mention them here. We've got move, where you tell it to move at a certain direction at a certain speed for a certain distance. Very handy. Move away moves it, from a position or a thing in a certain position. Very similar to move to and move towards. So again, there's different ways we can move stuff around, or we can, again, manually set different speeds or velocities to play around with all of that. So definitely check out the reference pages here. I already mentioned how to get to that, but for various things, again, we have sprites, the input devices. We'll have a video about animation very shortly, and interacting with sprites, and just, it's very, very useful. Let's hop back into here. So at this point, we can make the sprite respond to a keyboard. We just have to tell it what, key is being pressed and what to do. Also how it's being pressed, but that's a smaller issue. So we have all of that. Up, down, left, and right is good for the W, A, S, and D keys, as well as the arrow keys. If you want to have a player 2, generally speaking, a player 2 with this kind of setup would use the I, J, K, and L keys. So if we swap this to 2 right here and refresh it, we should see that now W, A, S, and D aren't doing anything. But I, J, K, and L are behaving in the same way. So if you have 2 sprites on the screen, you can independently control them with up and up 2 and have 2 players controlling things. I'm going to have my students make a version of Pong when we come back from winter break. It's kind of a refresher on all of this that's going to utilize these. So there's that. You can map them again to other things. So if I wanted to, for some reason, make it so that way E moved the sprite up instead. Well, if I press E now, there you go. I am curious. I'm going to find out if I pressed capital E. Okay, that's still the same thing. It will still work regardless of whether it's capital or lowercase. I'm going to put this all back to player 1. Just because I'll get goofed later on. So that's the short version of keyboard inputs right there. Again, you can tweak exactly how they're reacting based off of, pressed, pressing, hold, holding, held, released, all that kind of stuff. Here right now is another way to utilize the sprite using very, very similar things that I've mentioned already. This is a very handy code. I would recommend checking it out on your own. Hopping forward, this page doesn't necessarily need to have been a page, in my opinion. If you know how conditionals work, then yeah, you can set it up so that way multiple stuff is happening. That's all that's happening here. It says, hey, if we press the keyboard or you press the mouse, something happens, but as setting it up with conditionals, that's kind of implied that would work anyways. The mouse, though, this is the other thing I specifically want to mention because of the assignments that we do in my class. We do a lot more with the mouse than with the keyboard in terms of the big projects. So there's a few different ways that we can utilize this. Mouse is just the mouse in general. So if I hopped back over to my sketch, and I'm just going to make some space here. I'm still in the draw function because we have to check this every single frame, whether or not this is happening. And if I said if, mouse dot x is greater than 100, I don't know, my sprite dot color, actually it's just C now, equals color. We'll make it specifically bright green. How about that? RGB. Now, what should happen is if, let's get a not green one. Here we are. So now, if I move my mouse, it should turn green. Is that not how it works? There we go. It was color, not C anymore for some reason. But if I refresh this, again, as I move my mouse past pixel point 100, it turns to a bright green color. So again, we can just monitor the mouse in general. That's great. We have, pressing being a thing. If we've pressed the mouse, very, very handy. So let's say this, I'll just keep adding conditionals to change my sprite's color. If, mouse dot pressing, and then we'll just say, my sprite, sprite dot color equals color. We'll make it red, 25500. And And now if I click my mouse onto the canvas and then click again, it has turned red. If I move it past that 100 point, which is right about here, it turns green. And if I click it again, it's red. Keep in mind, if I'm clicking over here, because of the order, this second conditional is overriding the first one, which means it's technically being made red, but immediately green right on top of it, so we never actually see the red. There's also ones for dragging, which is very handy. So if you're moving the mouse while clicking, you can have stuff happen. You can kind of see where I'm going with some of this on the screen already, but what if you wanted to check if the mouse was clicking on a sprite? Previously, in the older versions, we could do this. It was relatively easy, but it involved a fair bit of steps. Instead, now it's a lot easier, so we can just check and see if, and this one, I'll bring back the my sprite dot rotation speed plus. Why not? But if we just have to talk to the sprite we want to check, and then use the same thing I've already mentioned, mouse pressing, just like that. And now, so I've got the green again. If I click over here, it turns red, but if I click on the sprite, it begins to click. And for every frame that it's detected I've been pressing, it's now increasing. It got too fast. But by doing this, we can now determine when the mouse has been clicked on a sprite. And for as many frames as it's detecting it being pressed, it will execute this. So one thing that might be handy is to add some other kind of internal conditional so you don't have a repeated interaction a bunch of times. I'll mention a specific instance of that when I talk about how to implement the bug squish game for my courses, so stay tuned for that. But just be aware that if you're just setting it up like this, that in this case, we're increasing the rotation speed by 1 for every frame that the mouse is clicking on the sprite, and that may not be exactly what you want. So just be aware of that. The last little page right here is on game controllers. I'm not really going to jump into it too much. We don't really use this kind of thing in the courses I make. Now, it is pretty handy because you can plug in a general USB game controller, or heck, a Bluetooth one could potentially even work, and it will look for specific things right here. However, not all of them are the same, so they may work, they may not. Again, if it's following just a generic protocol, it's just a generic controller, it'll probably work. But again, we don't really use that for the course I teach, so I'm not going to dive into it. There's, again, on the Learn page, if you have a USB controller you want to plug in and see if it works, go for it. An experiment, and that may be something that you really like, but I like to have my students make their own. With that being said, that's kind of the core of the various ways that we can play around with all of these things. It's essentially just saying, hey, we're going to look at what the keyboard is, and these are the most common ones, so we'll make easy strings for them, and they'll do a thing, and then combining it with setting the properties and methods of the various sprites. So again, you can move stuff, you can execute methods, you can do a whole lot just by saying, oh, did you click the mouse, and how did the mouse move, and did you hold the key or just click it? You can set these very, very specific interactions. So I'm going to encourage that you all play around with it and find your own stuff. Definitely check out the p5play reference material and learning pages. There's a lot there, especially once you've got an idea on how you can, kind of gate off the conditions, so you're only pressing the W key for something, and then, see what all you have to work with when you press that W key. There's really a lot there. I'm going to be wrapping it out now if you can't quite tell. But the last thing I do want to mention is that this version, at the time I'm recording these at least, is brand new. There are constant changes and updates happening. Some of the stuff I mentioned may get changed in the future, and when I figure out that that's happened, I'll make a new updated version of it. There may be something that you're like, why isn't this here? And it's still being worked on. So again, this is an active development is what they call it. So, be flexible if you notice something doesn't quite look exactly the same or some things have changed. Again, things are updating. I will update my videos as much as I can in order to have everything right here. Again, I'll have links to the docs, the learn page for the inputs, as well as this sketch right here in the description down below. So if you need anything, check that out. Check out the playlist that I'll also put down below. It's going to have just all of these videos with this version of the library there. And that's going to be it from me. So with that being said, I'll see you all the next time that I see you. Bye.